The letter arrived 11 years too late. Former Navy SEAL Ethan Cole nearly threw it away with the rest of his mail. The envelope was yellowed with age, the handwriting barely recognizable after so many years. But the moment he saw the name written in the corner, his blood ran cold. Staff Sergeant Ryan Mercer. Ryan had died in Afghanistan 11 years earlier. Ethan had attended the funeral. He had carried the casket. Yet somehow a letter from his dead friend now sat in his hands. Expecting answers, Ethan opened it immediately. Instead, he found only two things: a faded photograph of an old German shepherd sitting beside a weathered barn, and a single address written on a scrap of paper. An abandoned ranch nearly 200 miles away. No explanation, no message, no instructions, just a dog and a place. 3 days later, Ethan drove to the ranch. Before the week ended, he would uncover a secret Ryan had protected for more than a decade and discover that the old German shepherd had been waiting all those years for someone to finally come home. The envelope arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning in late October. Ethan Cole almost ignored it. At 48 years old, he lived a quiet life outside Cody, Wyoming, far removed from the world he once knew. His days were simple now: repairing fences, working on old trucks, fishing when the weather allowed. Most importantly, avoiding conversations about Afghanistan. Some memories never stopped hurting. 11 years earlier, Ethan served alongside Staff Sergeant Ryan Mercer during one of the most difficult deployments of his military career. Ryan wasn't just a teammate, he was family, the kind of friend forged through hardship, danger, and absolute trust. When Ryan died during an operation in eastern Afghanistan, something inside Ethan died too. The years that followed were filled with funerals, grief, and unanswered questions. Then came the letter. Ethan noticed the handwriting immediately. He hadn't seen it in over a decade, but some things were impossible to forget. His pulse quickened as he stared at the return name written in faded ink: Ryan Mercer. It couldn't be real, yet it was. The postmark itself appeared recent, though the envelope looked old enough to have spent years hidden away somewhere. Ethan carried it into the kitchen and sat down. His hands felt strangely unsteady. Slowly, he opened the envelope. He expected a letter, a confession, an explanation. Instead, a photograph slid onto the table. Ethan picked it up. The image showed an elderly German shepherd sitting in front of a weather-beaten barn. The dog looked old, very old. Gray fur covered much of its face, yet its eyes remained alert, intelligent, familiar. Ethan frowned. He knew that dog, or at least he thought he did. Then the memory surfaced. Shadow. The name escaped before he realized he had spoken aloud. Years earlier, Ryan owned a German shepherd named Shadow. The dog had been inseparable from him. Whenever Ryan came home on leave, Shadow rarely left his side. Ethan hadn't thought about the animal in years. The second item inside the envelope confused him even more. A small piece of paper containing nothing but an address. No note, no explanation, no signature, just an old ranch located deep in the mountains of western Wyoming. Ethan immediately searched online. The property appeared abandoned. Tax records showed no recent activity. The nearest town sat nearly 40 miles away. None of it made sense. Why would Ryan send this? More importantly, how could Ryan send this? For the rest of the day, Ethan tried convincing himself to ignore it. He failed. By evening, curiosity had become obsession. The next morning, he contacted Ryan's younger sister, Claire Mercer. If anyone knew what was happening, it would be her. Unfortunately, Claire seemed just as confused. "I've never seen the letter," she told him over the phone. But wait, Ethan listened carefully. "What?" Silence lingered for a moment. About 6 months before Ryan died, he bought a ranch. Ethan frowned. A ranch? He never told many people. Claire sounded uncertain. "Honestly, I thought he'd sold it years ago." Ethan felt a chill run through him. "Do you know the address?" After a brief pause, she read it aloud. It matched the paper sitting on Ethan's table exactly. Suddenly, the mystery became much more personal. Ryan had owned the ranch. Ryan's dog appeared in the photograph. Ryan somehow arranged for a letter to be delivered more than a decade after his death. Ethan knew only one thing for certain. He needed answers. 3 days later, he loaded supplies into his truck and headed west. The drive took nearly 5 hours. Mountains replaced highways. Dirt roads replaced pavement. Cell service disappeared completely. Eventually, he reached the property. The ranch looked exactly like the photograph. An aging barn stood near a weathered farmhouse surrounded by open fields. Time had not been kind to either structure, yet something immediately caught Ethan's attention. Fresh tire tracks. Someone had been there recently. His pulse quickened. Slowly, he stepped from the truck and approached the farmhouse. The front door hung slightly open. The wind creaked through broken boards. Everything appeared abandoned. Then he heard it. A bark. Deep. Hoarse. Old. Ethan turned toward the barn. Standing in the doorway was a German shepherd. Gray fur covered its muzzle. Its body showed the signs of age. Yet there was no mistaking those eyes. Shadow. 11 years after Ryan Mercer's death, the dog was still there, waiting. And judging by the way he stared at Ethan, Shadow seemed to know exactly who had finally arrived. Ethan Cole stood motionless in the cold Wyoming wind while the old German shepherd stared at him from the barn doorway. For a moment, neither moved. 11 years had passed since Ryan Mercer's death, yet somehow Shadow was still here. Older, slower. Gray fur covered most of his muzzle now, and his body carried the stiffness of age. But the eyes were unchanged. Ethan recognized them instantly. Intelligent, loyal, watchful. The same eyes that used to follow Ryan everywhere. Shadow, Ethan whispered. The dog tilted his head slightly. Then, to Ethan's surprise, his tail wagged once. Only once. It wasn't excitement. It felt more like recognition. Ethan slowly stepped forward. "Buddy, it can't really be you." Shadow walked out of the barn and approached him. When the dog finally reached him, he pressed his head gently against Ethan's leg. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He knelt and scratched behind the dog's ears. The fur was thinner than he remembered. The dog felt older than any German shepherd Ethan had ever seen. Yet somehow he was alive. "How?" Ethan asked quietly. Shadow offered no answers. Instead, he turned and began walking toward the barn. After several steps, he looked back, waiting. Ethan immediately recognized the behavior. The dog wanted him to follow. "You're kidding," Shadow barked once, then continued toward the barn. Ethan sighed and followed. The interior smelled of dust, hay, and old wood. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the walls. At first glance, the building appeared abandoned. Then Ethan noticed something strange. A section of the floor near the rear wall looked newer than everything around it. Fresh boards, different nails, different wood grain. Shadow walked directly to the spot and sat down. Ethan stared. No way. The dog simply looked at him. Years of military experience taught Ethan when to trust instincts. Right now, every instinct told him Ryan had planned this. Slowly, he knelt beside the boards and examined them. One plank shifted slightly under pressure. Ethan found a crowbar hanging nearby and carefully pried the boards loose. Beneath them sat a metal storage box. His heartbeat accelerated. The box showed signs of age, but remained sealed. Someone had hidden it deliberately. Shadow watched silently as Ethan opened the lid. Inside rested several items. Military photographs, a handful of letters, property records, an old combat knife, and on top of everything sat a notebook. Across the cover, written in Ryan Mercer's unmistakable handwriting, were 3 words. "If you're here." Ethan sat down heavily on a nearby crate. His hands suddenly felt unsteady. 11 years. 11 years of unanswered questions. 11 years of believing Ryan's story ended in Afghanistan. Slowly, he opened the notebook. The first page contained a simple message. "Ethan, if you're reading this, then Shadow found you. I wish I could explain everything face to face. Unfortunately, life doesn't always give us that option." Ethan swallowed hard and continued reading. The notebook revealed a side of Ryan's life Ethan had never known existed. Several years before his final deployment, Ryan quietly purchased the Wyoming ranch. Officially, it was an investment property. Unofficially, it became something much more important. A safe place. A place Ryan planned to retire one day. A place connected to a promise he made long before Afghanistan. As Ethan turned the pages, he discovered photographs of people he didn't recognize. Families, children, elderly men and women standing in front of small houses. Most photos included handwritten notes on the back. Ryan had been helping them. Financially, personally, quietly. For years, none of it made sense. Ryan never mentioned any of this. Then Ethan reached a page containing a single name, Daniel Reyes. His breath caught instantly. Daniel Reyes had served with them overseas. Officially, Daniel died during an operation 5 years before Ryan's death. Ethan remembered the funeral. He remembered standing beside Ryan afterward. He remembered the grief. Yet according to the notebook, Daniel's story didn't end there. In fact, Daniel survived. Ethan stared at the words in disbelief. What? Shadow remained beside him, watching patiently. The notebook explained that Daniel was extracted under circumstances so unusual that official records listed him as deceased. Ryan became one of only a handful of people who knew the truth. For years afterward, Ryan secretly helped protect Daniel and his family from individuals connected to a dangerous criminal network operating across multiple countries. Ethan's confusion deepened. This wasn't simply a collection of memories. It was evidence. Evidence Ryan had spent years gathering. Then he found the final section. Several pages had been marked with red tabs. The first page contained another message. If Shadow brings you this far, it means he believes you're ready for the rest. Ethan looked up at the old dog. Ready for what? Shadow stood immediately. Then he walked toward the opposite side of the barn. Ethan followed. Behind a stack of old feed bags sat another door, small, reinforced, almost invisible unless someone knew where to look. The German Shepherd stopped in front of it and sat down. Ethan stared at the door for several seconds. Then he looked back at the notebook. A final handwritten sentence waited near the bottom of the page. The truth about Daniel isn't in the box. It's behind the door. Ethan felt his pulse pounding in his ears. 11 years after Ryan's death, he had driven to an abandoned ranch expecting answers. Instead, every answer seemed to create even larger questions. Slowly, he reached for the door handle. Whatever waited on the other side had been hidden for a very long time. And judging by the way Shadow watched him, the dog had spent 11 years protecting it. Ethan Cole wrapped his fingers around the cold metal handle and hesitated. The reinforced door hidden inside the barn should not have existed. Nothing about the ranch had prepared him for this. What began as a mysterious letter from a dead friend had already led to a hidden box, a notebook filled with secrets and revelations that challenged everything he thought he knew about Ryan Mercer. Now there was another door, another secret, another piece of a puzzle Ryan apparently expected him to solve. Shadow sat quietly beside the entrance. The old German Shepherd seemed completely calm, as though he had performed this exact routine countless times before. Ethan took a deep breath and pulled the handle. The door opened inward with a low creak. Beyond it lay a narrow staircase descending beneath the barn. "You've got to be kidding me," Ethan muttered. Ryan had built an underground room. Ethan grabbed a flashlight from his truck and carefully made his way down the steps. The air below felt cool and dry. Whoever designed the space had done so professionally. Reinforced walls lined the passage. Electrical wiring ran overhead. At the bottom of the stairs, the corridor opened into a surprisingly large underground room. Ethan stopped instantly. It wasn't a bunker. It was an archive. Shelves covered every wall. Filing cabinets stood neatly arranged in rows. Maps hung from bulletin boards. Storage boxes filled with documents occupied nearly every available space. In the center of the room sat a large wooden desk. The scale of it stunned him. Ryan had spent years building this place. Shadow slowly descended the stairs behind him and walked directly to the desk. There he stopped and looked at Ethan expectantly. Ethan approached. Another notebook rested on the desktop. Unlike the first one, this notebook contained only a single label. For Ethan. His throat tightened. Slowly, he opened it. The first page contained Ryan's handwriting. "If you've made it this far, then something happened to me. If that's true, then you're probably angry, maybe confused. You deserve both." Ethan sat down heavily. Ryan's voice practically echoed through the words. The notebook explained everything. Years before their final deployment, Ryan discovered evidence of a criminal organization involved in human trafficking, financial exploitation, and witness intimidation. The network operated across several states and maintained connections overseas. During one operation, Daniel Reyes accidentally uncovered information that placed him and his family in immediate danger. Officially, Daniel died during a mission. In reality, a covert witness protection arrangement was created to keep him alive. Only a handful of people knew the truth. Ryan became one of them. Ethan stared at the pages. Every instinct told him this sounded impossible. Yet the evidence surrounding him suggested otherwise. Ryan spent the next several years secretly gathering information about the organization. Whenever deployments ended, he returned to Wyoming and added more files to the archive. The ranch became a secure storage location. The underground room became a safeguard. Then Ethan found the page that changed everything. Several photographs had been attached beside a handwritten note. One image showed Daniel Reyes, older, alive, standing beside a woman and two children. The photo, Ethan's hands trembled. Daniel really had survived. Another photograph showed Ryan standing with him, smiling. The realization hit harder than expected. For 11 years, Ethan mourned a friend who was still alive. Then came the final section of the notebook. Ryan's handwriting became noticeably less steady. If you're reading this after my death, the organization may still exist. Most of the evidence you need is here, but there is one final piece that matters more than everything else. Ethan continued reading. Ryan believes someone inside the federal system had been leaking information to the organization for years. That individual was never identified. Multiple witnesses disappeared after protected information was compromised. Several investigations collapsed unexpectedly. Ryan spent years trying to uncover the source. According to the notebook, he eventually succeeded. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. A single sealed envelope rested between the pages. Across the front were written 4 words, "Open only if necessary." Ethan stared at it for a long time. Then he carefully broke the seal. Inside was a photograph. The moment he saw the face, his blood ran cold. He recognized the man immediately. Not from the military, not from Afghanistan, from television. The individual had become a well-known public figure over the last decade. Respected, influential, powerful. Ethan immediately understood why Ryan hid the information. If true, the implications were enormous. Attached to the photograph was a flash drive and several pages of supporting evidence. Ethan sat silently for several minutes. The underground room suddenly felt much smaller. Ryan hadn't spent years protecting a simple secret. He had spent years protecting people, entire families, witnesses, survivors. Daniel Reyes was only one of them. Then Ethan noticed something else. A date written near the end of the notebook, 3 months before Ryan's death. Beneath it sat a final message. "If anything happens to me, Shadow knows where to go next." Ethan slowly lowered the notebook. His eyes drifted toward the old German shepherd lying beside the desk. "What does that mean?" Shadow raised his head. Almost immediately, the dog stood and walked toward another wall of the archive. Ethan followed. There, partially hidden behind several filing cabinets, hung a large map of Wyoming. One location had been circled in red marker. Ethan stared at it. The location wasn't near the ranch. It wasn't near any town. It was deep in the mountains, nearly 70 miles away. Attached beneath the map was a short handwritten note from Ryan. "The last person Daniel trusted is still waiting. Find her before they do." Ethan felt a chill run through him. The mystery he thought belonged to the past was suddenly very much alive. And somehow, 11 years after Ryan Mercer's death, Shadow was still leading him toward the next chapter. Ethan Cole barely slept that night. He remained inside the underground archive until long after sunset, reading through Ryan Mercer's notebooks and studying the evidence hidden beneath the ranch. Every document pointed toward the same conclusion. Ryan had spent the final years of his life protecting people connected to a criminal organization far larger than Ethan had ever imagined. The archive contained enough information to expose financial crimes, witness intimidation schemes, and trafficking networks operating across multiple states. Yet one mystery overshadowed everything else. The note attached to the map. "The last person Daniel trusted is still waiting. Find her before they do." Ethan stared at the words repeatedly. Ryan had written them 11 years earlier. If the woman was still alive, she had either been hiding all this time or someone had been protecting her. Either possibility raised uncomfortable questions. Shortly after dawn, Ethan loaded supplies into his truck. Shadow climbed into the passenger seat without being asked. The old German shepherd moved slower than he once had, but the determination in his eyes remained unchanged. Ethan glanced at him. "You really do know where we're going, don't you?" Shadow simply rested his head against the window. The drive lasted nearly 3 hours. Roads gradually narrowed into gravel trails before disappearing altogether. Eventually, Ethan was forced to continue on foot through rugged mountain terrain. According to the coordinates on Ryan's map, Their destination lay inside a remote valley surrounded by dense pine forests and steep cliffs. Few people had reason to travel there. That was probably the point. Around midday, Shadow suddenly accelerated. His pace quickened noticeably despite his age. Ethan immediately recognized the change. The dog knew they were close. 15 minutes later, the trees opened into a small clearing. At its center stood a cabin. Smoke drifted from a stone chimney. Fresh footprints surrounded the porch. Someone lived there. Ethan slowed. Every instinct told him to proceed carefully. Before he could take another step, the front door opened. A woman emerged holding a rifle. She appeared to be in her late 50s. Gray streaks ran through her dark hair. Her posture revealed confidence and experience. More importantly, the moment she saw Shadow, the rifle lowered. "Impossible," she whispered. The old German shepherd immediately trotted forward. Tears filled the woman's eyes. "Shadow." Ethan stopped. "You know him?" The woman looked from the dog to Ethan. Then her expression changed. Recognition. "You're Ethan Cole." It wasn't a question. "How do you know that?" Ethan asked. The woman stared at him for several seconds before answering. "Because Ryan told me you'd come someday." Silence followed. Ethan felt a chill run through him. "Who are you?" The woman swallowed hard. "My name is Elena Reyes." Ethan froze. "Reyes. Daniel Reyes." Suddenly everything made sense. "You're Daniel's wife." Elena nodded slowly. She invited Ethan inside. The cabin was modest but well maintained. Family photographs covered several walls. Ethan immediately recognized Daniel in many of them. Older, healthier, alive. For a moment, he simply stood there staring. 11 years of grief collided with reality. Daniel Reyes had survived. Not only survived, he had built a life. Elena watched him quietly. Ryan wanted it that way. They spent hours talking. Elena filled gaps in the story Ryan's notebooks could not explain. After Daniel's disappearance was staged, a small network of trusted individuals helped protect several witnesses connected to the criminal organization. Ryan became one of the most important members of that effort. Whenever he returned from deployment, he checked on families, delivered supplies, gathered intelligence, and maintained communication between people forced into hiding. "He never stopped helping people," Elena said softly. Ethan smiled sadly. "That sounds like Ryan." Then Elena's expression darkened. "But that's not why he sent you." Ethan immediately focused on her. "What do you mean?" Elena stood and retrieved a locked wooden box from beneath a bookshelf. The moment Ethan saw it, he recognized the military markings stamped along the side. Ryan's markings. Elena placed the box on the table. "Ryan brought this here 2 weeks before his final deployment." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. "What's inside?" "I don't know." Elena handed him a small key. "He told me only one person should ever open it." Ethan already knew the answer. Slowly, he unlocked the box. Inside rested a collection of documents, photographs, and digital storage devices. Yet one item immediately stood out. A recent photograph. Far more recent than anything else Ryan left behind. Ethan stared at it. The image had been taken only months before Ryan's death. It showed 3 men standing outside a warehouse. One of them was the powerful public figure whose photograph Ethan discovered in the underground archive. The second man was unfamiliar. The third made Ethan's blood run cold. "No," he whispered. Elena looked at him. "You know him?" Ethan nodded slowly. The third man wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a criminal, Ryan investigated. He wasn't connected to the organization at all, at least not publicly. The man was a decorated military officer, someone Ethan personally served under years ago, someone he trusted, someone who attended Ryan Mercer's funeral. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The implications were devastating. Ryan hadn't merely uncovered corruption. He had uncovered betrayal from within his own world. Then Ethan noticed a handwritten note attached to the photograph. Ryan's handwriting remained unmistakable. "If you're seeing this, they're closer than you think." Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. Shadow suddenly stood from his spot beside the fireplace and walked toward the cabin window. A low growl escaped his throat. Elena immediately looked up. "What's wrong?" Ethan followed the dog's gaze. Fresh tire tracks marked the dirt road leading into the valley. Tracks that had not been there when they arrived. Someone else had found the cabin. And judging by Shadow's reaction, they weren't friendly. The secret Ryan protected for 11 years had finally started moving again. This time, however, Ethan intended to finish what his friend began. The moment Shadow growled, every instinct Ethan Cole developed during his years as a Navy SEAL came roaring back. He moved to the cabin window and carefully studied the dirt road below. Two vehicles were approaching through the trees. Dark SUVs. No markings. No local rancher would be driving that route. Not this deep in the mountains. Not by accident. Elena Reyes saw them too. The color drained from her face. They found us. Ethan immediately turned toward her. How many people know about this place? Almost nobody. Her voice shook slightly. Ryan, Daniel, a few others. Ethan didn't need to hear more. Someone had followed a trail that should have remained buried for over a decade. Shadow continued watching the road. The old German shepherd stood completely still, focused on the approaching vehicles. Despite his age, there was nothing weak about him in that moment. He looked exactly like the protector Ryan always described. Ethan grabbed the wooden box and quickly secured the documents. We need to move. Elena nodded. There's another way out. She led him toward a concealed rear exit behind the cabin. Beyond it stretched a narrow trail winding deeper into the mountains. Before leaving, Ethan looked back one final time. The cabin had protected Daniel Reyes and his family for years. Now it had become compromised. The mission Ryan started 11 years earlier was no longer about hiding. It was about ending the threat permanently. They had barely entered the forest when vehicle doors slammed behind them. Voices echoed through the clearing. Shadow immediately moved ahead, leading them along the trail. The dog seemed to know every turn, every hidden path, every safe route. Ethan wasn't surprised. If Ryan trusted Shadow with his final plans, the dog had likely traveled these mountains countless times. For nearly an hour, they moved through dense forest while the pursuers searched behind them. Eventually, the trail led to an abandoned fire lookout perched high above the valley. From there, Ethan could see miles of wilderness stretching across Wyoming. More importantly, he could see the road below. The men searching the cabin had split into teams. Professional, Ethan muttered. Elena nodded grimly. The same people Ryan warned us about. Ethan sat beside the lookout window and began reviewing the evidence from Ryan's box. The deeper he dug, the clearer everything became. Ryan had identified not only the criminal organization but also the network protecting it. Politicians, businessmen, corrupt officials, even military personnel. The decorated officer in the photograph served as a bridge between several groups. For years, he helped leak information, protect criminal operations, and identify witnesses. Every major failure in the investigation traced back to the same small circle of people. Ryan hadn't died chasing rumors. He had been closer to the truth than anyone realized. Then, Ethan discovered something else. Hidden among the files was a series of digital backups, prepared only weeks before Ryan's final deployment. Multiple copies, multiple locations. Ryan had anticipated the possibility that something might happen to him. If one archive disappeared, others would survive. Ethan smiled sadly. You planned everything. Elena looked over his shoulder. What now? Ethan closed the folder. Now we finish it. Using satellite communications equipment stored inside the lookout station, Ethan contacted several former teammates he still trusted. Men and women whose integrity had never been questioned. Within hours, secure channels were established. Evidence began moving. Copies spread across multiple jurisdictions. Federal investigators received information. Journalists received information. Independent oversight offices received information. By sunset, the secret Ryan spent years protecting no longer depended on one person. It existed everywhere. There was no way to bury it again. The following days moved quickly. Investigations reopened. Warrants were issued. Financial records were seized. Several high-profile individuals suddenly found themselves facing questions they could no longer avoid. The decorated officer from the photograph resigned within 48 hours. Others attempted to flee. Most failed. For the first time in over a decade, the people Ryan protected no longer needed to hide. Elena watched the news coverage from the safety of a secure location. Tears filled her eyes when she saw Daniel's name finally cleared. Official records corrected the story. The man the world believed died years earlier was recognized for what he truly was, a witness who sacrificed everything to protect his family. Yet for Ethan, the most important moment came several weeks later. He stood beside Ryan Mercer's grave beneath a clear Wyoming sky. Shadow rested quietly beside him. The old German shepherd looked tired, more tired than ever before. Ethan understood why. For 11 years, Shadow had carried a responsibility that should never have belonged to a dog. He protected the ranch, protected the archives, protected Ryan's final mission. Most importantly, he waited. He waited for the one person Ryan believed could finish the job. Ethan knelt beside him and gently scratched behind his ears. "You did it, buddy." Shadow looked up at him. His tail wagged once. The same single wag Ryan always laughed about years ago. Ethan smiled. Mission accomplished. For several moments, man and dog sat together in silence. Then Ethan placed a hand on Ryan's headstone. "I got the message." The wind moved softly through the grass. Somewhere in the distance, mountains stretched toward the horizon. The world kept moving forward. The mission was over. The truth was finally free. Families who spent years living in fear could begin again. Ryan Mercer's final promise had been kept. And Shadow, the faithful German shepherd, who waited 11 long years for someone to come home, no longer needed to stand guard. He had finished his watch. At last, both soldier and dog could rest, knowing that some promises, no matter how long they take, are worth keeping until the very end. Sometimes the most important missions never appear in official records. They are not marked by medals, headlines, or ceremonies. They are carried quietly by people who choose to do the right thing, even when nobody is watching. And sometimes, those missions continue long after one of the people involved is gone. 11 years before Ethan Cole opened a faded envelope, Ryan Mercer understood something few people ever truly accept. The truth is valuable. Protecting innocent people matters. And some promises are worth keeping regardless of the cost. He knew he might not live long enough to finish what he started. So he prepared for that possibility. He left clues. He built safeguards. Most importantly, he trusted the one companion who would never abandon the mission. Shadow never understood criminal organizations, corruption, or secret investigations. He never understood the evidence hidden beneath the ranch or the danger connected to it. What he understood was loyalty. Ryan asked him to stay. Ryan asked him to wait. And for 11 years, that faithful German shepherd did exactly that. Through snowstorms, lonely winters, and countless empty days, Shadow guarded a promise. He waited for the right person to arrive. He waited for someone who could finish what his best friend began. Ethan Cole believed the letter was leading him to answers about the past. Instead, it led him toward a purpose in the present. Like many veterans, he carried grief that never completely disappeared. Ryan's death left questions that haunted him for years. Yet the journey to the abandoned ranch reminded him of something important. The people we lose do not vanish completely. Their values remain. Their sacrifices remain. The responsibilities they leave behind sometimes become our own. Daniel Reyes and his family spent years living in the shadows because powerful people wanted the truth buried forever. Ryan refused to let that happen. Ethan refused to let it happen. Together, separated by more than a decade, they completed the same mission. One protected the truth, the other delivered it. And at the center of everything stood an old German shepherd who never stopped believing someone would eventually come. Perhaps that is why stories like this stay with us. They remind us that loyalty matters, integrity matters, promises matter. In a world where many things feel temporary, there is something powerful about a commitment that survives years, distance, loss, and hardship. Shadow's watch lasted 11 years. Ryan's plan lasted even longer. Neither gave up. In the end, that persistence changed lives. Families found justice. Witnesses found freedom. A hidden truth finally reached the light. And a soldier's final promise was fulfilled exactly as he intended. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever known a dog whose loyalty amazed you? Have you ever carried a promise for someone you loved? We'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories about veterans, loyal dogs, second chances, faith, family, and the extraordinary ways courage can survive across generations. May God bless you and your loved ones, strengthen those carrying difficult responsibilities, comfort those missing someone they love, and remind all of us that the greatest acts of loyalty are often the quietest ones. And may you never forget that sometimes a promise can outlive the person who made it, carried forward by a faithful friend who refuses to abandon his post until the mission is finally complete.